All right, so if you guys watch the videos and you don't have any more questions, and we can come back to them at any point, basically, that you want to discuss those, that's fine. I want to get us into our chapter this week. And this week, we are on chapter 6 that talks about finding and using supporting materials, okay? It could be a little bit boring chapter for you. I don't know. Some people find it boring. Some people find it exciting. It really depends on who you are and what you think is boring or exciting. So let's put it this way. It's necessary. If you're going to do a good speech, you're going to have supporting materials. You can't just make a point and just say, well, that's it. You're just supposed to accept what I said. And everybody goes, ooh, yeah. No, that's not how it works. Because remember, critical thinking, our minds keep running. Our minds keep analyzing what the person said. There's going to be people going to say, oh, no, that's not true, or that's silly, or that's nonsense. They're going to dismiss it. They're going to think. So if you're making a point, you better have the ability to develop it. And sometimes you need some support. So that's what this chapter is about. How do you support things in your speech? Where do you find them? How do you put that together? So very good practical chapter with some really good advice. And I'm hoping that you guys can, zero in on that and use that. All right, so let's get into the chapter. The authors basically open us up there in chapter 6, where they try to explain that information is information, okay? But simply having information doesn't really help us, okay? Just giving your listeners information is pointless. It doesn't work. What we do is we need to sort through the information, sift through it, and help to make some sort of a cohesive conclusion based on the information that's out there for our listeners. That's what we're doing, okay? You got to choose the right supporting materials, and then you have to present them in the correct way, okay? Let's see. The authors speak on page 76, and they say that basically what you need is to turn information into knowledge. See, that's different. Information and knowledge are not the same. To transform streams of facts into something your listeners can use in their daily lives. Facts versus something useful. If you could just give me a bunch of statistics, that doesn't help me. But if you interpret that, then I can go with it. Then I know what to do with it. And so that's what they mean by saying your job is to transform information into knowledge. Just because you know something about some topic, that doesn't mean that that's all you need, is to know more about that topic. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? How does it help you? What does it do for you? Can you use it in this way? Can you use it in that way? What good is it to know these things? That's really where, sort of say, information ends and knowledge begins. Let's put it that way. Because otherwise, just data, just facts, just information doesn't really get you there. So hopefully, you understand the difference between those two things. So that's kind of how they kick us off, and then the chapter turns to this section on determining the kinds of supporting materials you need. We've already talked about this a little bit. If you're tasked to develop a speech, you must ask some questions. Who is listening to me? What am I talking about? What is my purpose for speaking, right? What is my general purpose, right? We talked about that. When you're getting ready to write a speech, am I going to write a speech to inform, or I'm going to write a speech to persuade? Or is this something else? Is it, so yes, if my speech is to inform, then all right, and I'm informing an audience. Well, what does my audience know? Does my audience know what I want to inform them about? Or how much do they know? What do they know? What they probably don't know? What should they know, about this particular topic? Or is that even what I want to talk about? But these are all assumptions that help you to figure out what you should be doing as far as your research and supporting materials go. Because if your audience knows a lot about a topic, that's one thing. If your audience does not know a lot about a topic, that's a whole different game. Now you're going to have to educate them. But what do you educate them on? How much do you tell them? Do you tell them everything, or you just tell them the main things? How do you do that? So, and that all is embedded in this question: what support does your topic require? You pick the topic, and whatever your topic is, you can say, all right, what support does my topic require? Well, also keep in mind that what support does my audience require? Because depending on your audience, your support needs will probably change. Uh, as far as the support goes, and as far as also the forms in which you present that support will change as well. So asking a question, what does the audience need to know, is obvious. It's right there. It's a subset. What type of support I need and what does my audience need to know about it? Again, all depends on a particular situation, a particular topic. There is no one simple answer to that question. It's completely 100% situational. All right. So which form of support will be most effective? Well, there are different forms of supports out there. Okay. You can explain things, you can compare things, you can use personal testimony, and so if you notice, like the model speech that we just talked, she used a lot of explanations, and then she used a lot of examples and comparisons. She used the side-by-side photos of her in real life and then photos of her in a magazine, commercial, advertising, or whatever, to explain something and to contrast and to compare. This is me in real life. This is me on the photo set. And basically what she's trying to say is that, this is fantasy. This is not real life. What you're seeing on the picture of a magazine is a work of art, not reality at all. So again, what sort of support will be most effective? What form? For her to show the picture of her in real life and then a picture of her on the commercial was a very effective form of support. That was a comparison, and so and maybe sort of say that was a really effective way for her to get the point across. Given another topic, given another situation, given another speech, maybe that would not have been effective. Maybe something else would have been effective. So you have to pick the form of support that will work the best for your speech, for your topic, whatever it may be. Okay. And another question that you must ask is how objective is your supporting material? Okay, so obviously if you're making a speech like about yourself or something like that, then it's objective because it's about you, and that's pretty clear. But if you're making a speech about some other topic that is a bit more involved, you're talking about an event that happened, or you're talking about some circumstances, or you talk about some particular thing or an item, let's say, and you're giving statistics, how credible is your information? Is it accurate? Is your history accurate? Is your story right, essentially? Because the truth is that not all information we find on everything is accurate. And whenever we have information, we have sources of information. And what are the sources upon which we lean? Okay. There are primary sources and there are secondary sources. Primary sources are usually things like eyewitness accounts and people who speak about themselves or something about they've seen themselves. And so those tend to be more factual, more concrete, things that you can really say, okay, that's for real. That person really saw it, really was there, really experienced it, really knows it, And then there's secondary sources. Secondary sources are based on some other information that is not first-hand information, second-hand information. So can you guys think of some examples for me of primary sources and secondary sources? Can you think of any examples? When we talk about credibility of sources, you do a story or you do a topic, and how do you determine a primary source from a secondary source? Go ahead, Francisco. Francisco, you there?
Hear me?
I lost you there for a second.
Okay. I was saying that I think that primary sources are like studios or biographies, books. Let's say that is when you catch or when you get the main content of the topic that you're talking. Is I mean, is when you get the fact,
Hmm.
the main information.
Right.
And secondary sources may be some things that you can see every day or you can uh, relate to the topic that you think that they are true, but maybe it depends on how everybody sees the information.
Okay. So let's just dig together just for fun. Just for fun. Let's imagine this. Go ahead, Nancy.
I always, well, with my previous teachers, we always talk about Wikipedia, for example. And I don't know now how it's Wikipedia working or running, but I know that everybody that wants to edit something, they can edit it. So
Right.
it's like when you put Wikipedia resources, they are not reliable. And actually, I think that it's not accepted by, for example, the schools or some other institutions because it's not a reliable source,
No,
right?
Wikipedia is not a reliable source because it is a community edited resource, and people who edit Wikipedia or put the information together are not professionals in that field, and they have no credentials, and we have no reason to trust them. Anybody can put anything on the internet, doesn't make it true, right? So that is true about everything, essentially. Think about it. So yeah, besides the fact that Wikipedia is not a trustworthy source, it's a general source of information. You can go to it. There's nothing wrong with it. But don't believe it 100% every single time, and don't make it your primary source or make it your go-to place. Let's put it that way. Same goes for Google or everything else. If I ask my kids, how do you know something? I just ask Google. I'm like, what if Google lies? How do you know? What if Google decides to lie to you? Would you know that it's lying to you? No, I wouldn't know it because you don't know anything about this topic you're asking. And you're trusting that Google is telling you the truth. But what if it's not? What if it decided to lie to you? What if it said the 45th president of the United States was Abraham Lincoln? Would you believe it? Yeah, because you don't know your history. You're going to say, yeah, of course, y'all believe he was the 45th president of the United States. You see, you just, do you know how many presidents the United States have been had? No, I don't know. So if you go to Google and say 45th president of the United States and it says President, Abraham Lincoln, you're like, okay, Google says so, therefore it must be true. But it actually is absolutely not true. So things like that. What we mean by primary sources and secondary sources is not sources you go to first or sources you go to second. Francisco was right when he's saying autobiography is a good example of a primary source. Now let me give you an example. Autobiography and biography. What's the difference? Anyone? Autobiography and biography.
Um, Autobiography is when you talk about yourself, and
Yes.
biography is when, let's say, an university or a group of people make a studio or they record something about
Something
a
about
famous
something about
person.
something about you. Somebody else talks about you. So autobiography is
Yeah.
when you talk about yourself, and biography is when somebody else talks about you, not you yourself. So that's the biggest difference. So guess which source is the primary? Yourself, because you know yourself and you know what you said and you know what you think. Somebody else who relates your thought for you may not get it right. They may twist it. They may incorrectly represent it. So it's already not 100%. It could be incorrect. It could be inaccurate. So somebody who saw an event, who was there, is going to be more accurate than a person who writes about. And if I decided to write right now about Second World War, let's put it that way. Let's say I decided to write a book about Second World War. I could be pretty accurate. I could be very accurate if I wanted to. You know why? Because I've met very many people that have gone through the Second World War. I can still interview people who were there, and I can get a really good picture. I have photographs, I have videos, I have all sorts of documentary information about Second World War, and I can talk about it, and it can be very accurate because I actually have people that I can interview and verify. Is that true? Did this really happen? You were there. How was it? And they can tell me. And so those are my primary sources. And so even though I write a book about Second World War and I become a secondary source, I'm still basing a lot of my information on primary sources because I can. Well, let's say I want to write a book about the First World War. Well, now I'm going to have a problem. Why? Because there are no people walking around who were there during the First World War. There's not. You're not going to find many people who are still alive. First World War happened from 1914 to 1918. So that means that somebody had to be an adult in 1914. All right, so that make them like over 100 years old. So you're not going to find people like that. And if you find people like that, they may not even remember what it was like 100 years ago. So that's the problem. I'm not going to have primary sources anymore. I'm only going to have to lean on secondary sources. And so I may have letters of soldiers from First World War. I may have journals. I may have all sorts of, and those would be good primary sources because they're close to that time. They're close to that place. But then I will, I won't have any eyewitnesses anymore. And so the further we get away from the topic, basically, the more the source is removed, the more secondary it is, or tertiary, and so on and so forth. So, and that's the difference between primary sources and secondary sources. It's how close is that person or that description to that topic. How well do they know it? How were they directly involved or indirectly involved? Things like that. So hopefully that makes sense. And so when you're asked to do research, what is a primary source and what is a secondary source? If you're doing research on microbiology and, there's somebody who's written a paper or did a study on a particular topic, and you go straight to that paper, you're using a primary source. When you're using an article that somebody else wrote about that person doing a study on that topic, then you're already using a secondary source. Why? Because you're not going to that study directly. You're already taking somebody else's interpretation of what that study says. So that's the major difference between primary sources and secondary sources. But it's really important when it comes to credibility and objectivity. How objective is your material? Are you precise? Are you exact? Or are you relying on too many sources that are secondary, or even more removed from the source? So what is the source of information? What is the authority? Who are you trusting, basically, to supply you the facts? And how trustworthy are those sources? That's really the question. Okay. Anyway, sorry for a bit of a long diatribe, but this is an important one. Why? Because I see a lot of people pulling all sorts of information from all sorts of untrustworthy places and then believing it and then trusting it where it's absolutely wrong and incorrect and twisted. And they don't even know, because as far as they're concerned, it's the only place they can get information. And it's not. There are better places, let's put it that way. So people believe all sorts of things. Doesn't make those things true. All right. There's a nice little box right here on page 75 that I thought was really helpful. And I wanted to highlight your attention, guys, to this. And the question is, how much material should I use in my speech, sporting material? And that is a relative question, okay? So people say, oh, my speech is so easy. I'm just talking about this. I don't really need a lot of sporting material. Some speeches, yes. Some speeches do not require a lot of sporting material. Other speeches do. So how do you decide when you use a lot, when you use a little, and how much is too much and how much is the right amount? So here's the advices that the writers of this textbook give us. They say complex and abstract ideas are enhanced by visual aids and specific examples. So again, if you're doing something, if you're trying to explain something complicated, then using visual aids and using very specific examples, concrete examples, is very helpful. Just like I did right now on the primary and secondary sources. I used very concrete examples to try to help you understand the difference between them, okay? Then they say controversial points require a lot of authoritative evidence. So the more the more controversial is your point, the more evidence you must have. Why? Because most likely when you make a claim on a controversial issue, and a controversial issue is an issue that people are in a great disagreement of, that means a large amount of people do not agree or do not think in the same way. So essentially, the more controversial issue, the more evidence you need, and the more authoritative that evidence needs to be, the higher quality of that evidence. You can't just say, well, everybody knows that so-and-so is crazy, therefore we shouldn't take him seriously. Like, well, wait a minute, how does everybody know? Did we test this guy? Did we send him to the doctor? Did we see a report, that this person is really, crazy or something like that? That's the thing. Oh no, everybody knows that. And so what is my source? My source is nothing, because I say everybody knows, and that doesn't necessarily make it true. So the more controversial the point, the more supposed to be your evidence, and the better quality is supposed to be your evidence. Now, another point that the authors make is that speakers with low credibility need more supporting material than speakers with high credibility. So that means that if you are a speaker who has expertise in a particular area, okay, you may not need to sort of say qualify as much as a person who doesn't have expertise in a particular area. All right. So it all depends on how much credibility you yourself have. If you have a particular resume and you could say, hey, I've done this, I know this, you can trust me on this topic, maybe other topics that I know, but this one I do, then all of a sudden you become more credible. So we watched the speech of the model, and she basically, did her presentation, and she said, hey, I'm a model. Well, all of a sudden she's an expert. Why? Because we're not models. We don't know what the world of a model is like. We don't know what a job is like. We don't understand these things. We just see the final product. But she says, okay, listen to me. I know this is how things are. And all of a sudden, her credibility is much higher than anybody else's. We trust her because that's who she is. So she didn't need to say, I really know what models live like. If a person who was making that same speech was not a model, they would have to qualify themselves, basically, to make the same exact points. But because the person making that speech was a model, all of a sudden her qualifications are enough, and everybody trusts her automatically because she knows what she's talking about. It's her area. Okay, so another point that the authors make is if listeners are unfamiliar with the topic, use concrete supporting materials to establish identification with them. So once again, going back to the example of the model speech we watched, she used very concrete supporting materials. She showed pictures of herself modeling, and her pictures in everyday life to illustrate that this is all imagination, this is all fantasy. It doesn't really look like that in real life. So you're unfamiliar with how much sort of say art there is in a magazine ad, and so because that's not your industry, you understand, you're unfamiliar how much art goes into it, you are most prone to believe that that's just how the person looks, where in reality, no, that don't look anything like that at all. It's all fantasy. So the idea is that because listeners are unfamiliar with that, the supporting materials that were very concrete, like pictures of her here and her there, were very effective in persuading me to see the difference, how stark the reality is. Okay. So, and then the last point says, if your audience attention and comprehension is low, use more examples. So that, again, you have to judge your audience. You have to know, are they truly engaged or less engaged? What is their level for comprehension? What is their level for attention? Are they truly engaged with this topic or not? How interested are they? Can you gauge if your audience is super interested in your topic or just mildly interested in your topic? So, and based on that level of engagement, you can either use more examples or less examples. So the more disconnected the audience is, the more they're going to need to simplify. You need to simplify things, and that means offering concrete examples to keep their attention focused on the topic. So these are good, really good suggestions for us, and hopefully this makes sense. Does this answer your question? How much supporting material should my speech have? Yeah, in a way. If you know what your speech is about, and if you know what your audience is, then based on these criteria, you may say, I need more or I need less. So there's your answer. Your answer is in these points. It's just it really depends on your topic. It depends on what you're setting out to accomplish. Okay, so that's the idea. Any questions on this so far? Any thoughts? Any questions? Does this make sense? Any feedback?
No, for me.
Okay. All right, good. So we're moving on to finding supporting materials now. So determining, we talked about determining the kinds of material you need to, how do you find this information? I just told you, all right. So you need to write a speech. You're gonna have to find supporting materials because your speech, topic demands that you have some sort of facts or statistics, or, how do you have a strong speech? Like that model talked about how many black models there are out there versus how many white models. She had statistics. She found that statistic somewhere. Where did she find that statistic? She found that statistic in somebody's article who wrote it because they did a study. They did a study on that topic. They specifically studied that issue and they calculated. She didn't go out and figure that out herself. She relied on somebody else having done the study and having done the survey. So she found that information somewhere out there, right? And she found it to be credible, and then she used it in her speech. And it worked. It was effective. It illustrated her point very well. So you may have to do the same with your speech. And that's the idea. So where do you go? All right. So Nancy already mentioned the word Wikipedia, and that most of us in the academic world consider the dirty word, right? So although if you ask Google anything, that's the first thing that comes up is Wikipedia, right? So most people, if they're going to find some sort of a supporting material, they're going to go to Google, they're going to go to Bing, they're going to go to Wikipedia, they're going to go to all those places. And those are the places I'm going to tell you not to go, okay? Those places are not bad places, but they are places where you start, not places where you end. You never begin and end in Google. You never begin and end in Wikipedia or Bing or anything else. It's only the starting point. It's not the end. So for many people, it is the end. It's the only place they go for information. It's the only place they know to go for information, which is kind of sad because the world is so much bigger and so much fuller of places to find information. All right, so you can go to those places just to establish the very generic knowledge. Nothing wrong with Wikipedia to establish a generic knowledge, all right? If you wanted to know the dates of the First World War, I think the Wikipedia is going to be right about it, okay? I don't think they're going to mess up on the dates. I mean, it's not that bad. Yes, Wikipedia is a community-sourced resource. Yes, they rely upon volunteers to provide a lot of their information and data and non-professionals to put it all together. Yeah, it's true. But a lot of times, they're going to get things right. Like if you read an article on the First World War, it's going to say the war began in such and such a year, and the war ended in such and such a year. And these are the countries that were involved in that war. I'm pretty sure that the Wikipedia is going to get it right on those facts. Now, there's some other nuances and details it may not get right, but those big ones it will get right. So is it a bad place to go get general information? No, it's not a bad place to go get general information. But it's not a good place to stop and go no further. That's the problem. So many people simply do not go beyond that. That is their only go-to source, okay? And so there are places that you can get information. There are knowledge of experts that you can get, essentially. Excuse me for a second here. Somebody's trying to ring me, and I can't right now. Okay. I don't know. Something is ringing here in my computer. Somebody's trying to reach me on one channel somewhere. I don't even know which one. Okay. Sorry, it just distracted me. All right, so I'm talking about different sources that are out there. So how do you find those sources? What are the best sources? The best sources, despite most people wanting to go to Google, Bing, or Yahoo, or some place like that, they're actually your print resources. Traditional library is gonna do better. It's not that you're gonna be able to find things quickly. Like, yeah, you can go to Google and say, well, when did the First World War begin? And you'll get an answer in seconds. But if you really want to study the First World War, I wouldn't suggest doing it through Google. I would suggest go pick up a few books by historians, by people who write on the topic, who have advanced degrees, who have studied this topic for a long time, who include the study of people who were there, testimonials, documents, research, things like that. You're not going to find any of that at Google. Well, you can find some of it at Google, but you got to know where to look. And most people never look there. Okay. So I'll show you a couple of places where you can get some really deep, credible information on some of these topics. Okay. So the best place is to go to your print library, actually. And so, we have library at our school. There are public libraries that are available to you as well. You can go there. And there are large universities, colleges all over the place that you can walk into the library. Believe it or not, they're open to the public. And you can pick up books and read them and research them. You can search their library catalog, find the right volumes, and study there all day long if you want to. Sometimes you have to sign in and things like that, but it's not a big deal. Most libraries that even at private universities are accessible to the public, and you can get all sorts of information there. So you can find print editions that deal with your topic or question if you're going to study it seriously. And you really need to know about it. That's where you do research, is at the library. It is the best place. All right. Now, libraries are going to have a lot of electronic resources, by the way, too, that are not going to show up on Google or Yahoo or Bing or anything like that. They're unique educational resources that only libraries have access to. Most of those resources are databases that libraries have to pay for, actually a lot of money every year. And they house massive amounts of research and articles and special, let's say, industry unique information or topic unique information that is going to be very narrow. And so most libraries have massive amounts of electronic resources, which are also easily available and easily searchable, much quicker than even going to a bookshelf and picking it up. But you have a source of printed media, and then you have the source of electronic media. And again, academic media versus popular media. What you're going to see there's different levels of available information out there. There's popular level of information, and then there's the academic level of information. And they're very different. So depending on what your speech is, how technical it is, how difficult the topic is, how deep you're intending to go, how heavily does your audience expect you to engage it, you might have to pick up something a little bit more deeper than the popular level materials, popular level literature. You may not be able to just pick stuff up of some website and rehash it and present it to somebody else, because people are not going to find that satisfying at all. You might have to go much deeper and dig, a lot further to really come up with something awesome and impactful. So libraries have print editions, and they are the most credible. Why? Because while anybody can publish anything on the internet, you can be a complete, full idiot, crazy, insane person, and you can put anything on the internet, and it's out there. Okay, and anybody can read it, and then anybody that reads it can copy it and pass it on and share it with everybody else. that doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it accurate. But if you're going to get published by a major publishing house, guess what? They have editors and they have peer reviews. And if what you write makes no sense, if what you write is inaccurate, they're going to flag it right away, and it's never going to pass. In fact, most publishing houses never even going to publish your book unless you can present them your credentials that you actually know what you're talking about. So it's not that easy to publish a book in a publishing house, in a for-profit publishing house. That's, I'm not talking about self-publishing. That's a different story. But I'm talking about publishing houses that are commercial. It's not that easy. And so when they do publish your information, you can pretty much trust it. And you could pretty much say, this is good stuff. It's been verified. Maybe not everybody will agree with it, but at least the quality is there. And so you can compare it with other sources of information, of course, but it's still there. All right, so the electronic resources are listed on page 77, and there's a whole list of them. These are pretty good, actually. Let's see. I do use different types of academic search, like ProQuest and EBSCOhost. I have used it many times. If you have not done scientific work or detailed scholarly work, you probably have never used these and never had a chance to do that. But there are articles from major journals and publications of various fields of science and study. So if you're writing something about literature, you go there. If you write something about science, could it be physics, you're going to go there. If you're going to write something medical, you're going to go there. If you find something about foreign languages, you're going to go there. These are things that are various fields of studies that are covered. Scholarly journals and scholarly societies exist so that they can exchange research, advanced research in those areas, and they share that through journals. And those journals publish that information, and a lot of times it's not free. It's collected in databases, and they maintain those databases, and they share those databases for a fee with libraries. And as a result, libraries have access to massive amounts of very recent knowledge from the top people in the field who are doing research in that area right now, basically. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, some of these you may have heard, some of these you may not have never heard of, but it's a really great list, by the way. So definitely do not lose sight of it on page 77. These are serious research resources that many academic libraries would have. Okay, and I can actually show you how to access these resources through our library site. Okay, so I can show you how to do that. In fact, well, let me show you how to do that right now. Let me do my screen sharing here. I'll do a Chrome tab. All right, so here I am in, let's see, I'm back in my Populi. All right, so here's our classes, and let me show you our library. So when you're in our Populi, you can click on the library link right here at the top, right? And you enter here, and this is where our library catalog is, what they're working right now, and I'm putting all the information right now, so it's still kind of being worked on. But right here, you go to links, okay? And right here is where you already have information to different places that you can research. Like, for example, Sage Publishing offers all sorts of journals on business and management. For example, you could do you can log in and search articles in business and management. You can search Sage religion page. You can search humanities, which is going to be all sorts of humanities sciences, including the Bible and things like that. Perseus Digital Library is going to be texts that are Greco-Roman ancient texts, so materials of original texts from the Greco-Roman antiquity, philosophers, historians, orators. You're going to find that right here in Perseus Library. Some of them you may find even in original language, so which is pretty amazing. So let's see. all sorts of, early church fathers. There you go. Directory of open access journals. It says a database over 13,000 journals, 4 million articles across all major academic disciplines. Do you think you're going to find something pretty amazing over here? Absolutely. Again, how long does it take to search your topic? If you know what your topic is and it's very narrow, it might take you just a few minutes to check it out, but you got 4 million articles. The likelihood of you stumbling across something fairly interesting is very, very high. And maybe, right there is where you find your sources.